Hi, Dan.
Hi, Jason.
We are live at WWDC.
This is an interesting... Usually you and I are sitting in our offices, sometimes in the back of a golf cart.
Yes.
But this is kind
our
of
offices.
different...
There's rarely a golf cart in our offices, though.
Not never. Rarely.
Rarely. Right. You never know.
Anyways, where are we?
We are in the ring, Dan. We are at Apple Park for WWDC. The place to be. Is it the place to be? I guess it is.
A lot of stuff happened.
We saw the part that people didn't see.
That's true.
We saw the first good morning from Tim.
Yes.
And the first greeting from Craig.
Craig live.
And, there was a question of was the presentation going to have a profession of love for developers? And the answer is the pre-presentation had a long profession of love for developers, especially from Craig.
Yeah, that's true.
Less in the video because they got that's for everybody.
A lot of stuff.
But we got a little more relaxed Craig at the beginning.
It's always nice to see people in person.
So it is also interesting to see that video with an audience because you get to measure the reaction.
It is interesting. And the things that I felt like I reacted to are not always the same as the things I think everybody else is reacting to. I feel like I laughed at one point at something and maybe John Gruber turned around to look at me because he was sitting in front of us. And I was like, I don't know. It just struck me as funny.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that was the announcement of expose for the iPad.
Yes.
For some reason, that made me laugh. I love it. It's great. But it is just so wild that they kind of just checked off all the things that I felt like I was... Hey, for years, people worried. They're like, oh, they're going to turn the Mac into the iPad. They're going to turn the Mac. They're going to bring all that iPad stuff into the Mac and just make the Mac the iPad. When, in fact, what they did was 180 degrees from there.
Yeah, very. I was in a little briefing earlier. We were just, it was one of these weirder briefings where it's sort of like, tell us your feelings about the event and we'll react to them. And it's all on background with no quotes. I'm like, well, what? Okay.
Can you describe
have a
your feelings in 2 emoji that you combine together?
I can quote myself, though. And I say one of the things that I thought was sometimes Apple does a release where you can see the check boxes getting ticked for all of the complaints, where it's really like, all right, we're going to do it this time. Stop your complaining. We did all the things. And the iPad announcement felt like that. Everybody who said you need to rethink the windowing, it needs to be more functional for pro users, all of those things. I feel like if I had a top 5 list of iPad things that are missing, they might have checked all 5.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's interesting to compare it to last year, where the iPad was... the iPad has often seemed to be on an every other year cycle. Last year, I remember us talking about it and writing stuff up. iOS had a lot of updates at Apple Intelligence, and the iPad obviously gets all of that as part of that.
Yeah, just platform features.
But when I remember us doing the iPad review in the fall and trying to come up with what is in iPad OS that's not anywhere else, and it was like math notes, and I think 1 or 2 other features that were pretty small.
Yeah, it was really limited.
So you kind of zoom out a little bit and from a macro level get an idea more of okay, the more substantive work on the iPad I think happens maybe more like every other year, but you still need to do stuff every year. Right. It's just some years it gets more attention.
Well, yeah, you bring along the platform features and then you kind of put your stake in the ground every other year for a larger...
But this is a big one, and I think there's a reason it got saved till last.
Yes,
the presentation.
I think they knew that was their biggest thing.
That I would say some of the Mac OS changes too are meaningful to people like us, which I think is interesting because it re-aimed the Mac a little bit as more of a pro tool than in the past.
Yeah, I was surprised. I think there are some crowd-pleasing features in iOS for sure.
Sure, yeah.
But I was surprised to come away with something that I feel is fairly rare for these events, which is I came away most excited about Mac and iPad announcements and not iPhone announcements.
In some ways, there was more opportunity there, I think, too. Like the Mac and the iPad. I mean, the Mac in terms of a platform that is almost half a century old, right? You're coming up on 50 years.
Yeah.
And I think the Apple starts to have a better sense now of who are the people using the Mac? What are they using it for? In a world where you have iPads and iPhones to do a lot of the stuff that we do every day, who is still using a Mac and why? And let's maybe think about features that cater to that population specifically. And that is really smart. And at the same time, to make the iPad a more capable device, like in its own way, that isn't just following on what the Mac does.
Yeah, the idea that, if you're using a Mac, you kind of are a power user. Not everybody who uses a Mac is a power user, but people who are power users are using computers. And so giving them some features and also coloring in some of the last little bits of the Mac. Like because I wrote the story maybe a year ago that was thinking about all the progress that Apple has made with OS X and Mac OS over the years, where in the early days, you had all these great utilities that did all these things that the Mac just couldn't do. But if you look now, because it was in the context, the piece I wrote was in the context of must-have utilities, and I realized that I used to have lots of must-have utilities, like Launch Bar, but like Spotlight is so good, you don't really need Launch Bar. It does some stuff, and I realized the one little bit that hadn't been colored in was clipboard history, which they colored in along with a lot of other
decades.
Yeah, along with other power features that are kind of rolled into Spotlight.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. And then the other thing, and we should have known this from when Apple talked about the ability of the Ultra processor, especially to run LLMs locally.
Right.
That another thing you lean into is AI functionality on a device that can do a bunch of stuff locally. And so the shortcut stuff where you can query a local model, a cloud model for Apple or ChatGPT, and then act on the results is going to be super powerful. And that is it's a super nerdy techie thing, but like you're using a Mac, this is the kind of thing you want.
It's aimed at that group of people because in order to find it, you've got to be using shortcuts or something like that, which, self-selection to a degree. I thought it was also interesting in terms of like the clipboard manager that one of the things that you and I have talked about in the past is Apple very carefully navigating that area, commonly parlance Sherlocking. Like there are obviously tons of clipboard managers for the Mac and have been for many years. And this will not remove it from, those from usage for everybody because those have more features than this has. Right? Like if this is clipboard history, it doesn't do maybe power features that some other clipboard managers do. But for a lot of people, they'll be like you in Launch Bar and Spotlight, it's like, well, it's good enough. That's the main thing that I want. And then I think what's nice about it is actually there's like a rising tide situation because lots of people will start using clipboard like the built-in clipboard history and thinking, this is great, but what if it also could do X? And you get those people into like third-party utilities. So I do think it helps them because not everybody was going to go seek out a clipboard manager in the past.
Yeah, there's a law to be written and named here. So I'm going to leave that. Maybe our members and you can come up with that. But it's something about how Apple rolls out a feature. And whether it's a super broad feature or even a nerdy niche feature, this is why I say that Sherlocking isn't real. Because what Apple's building for is a percentage of the functionality that they think kind of hits a sweet spot.
Right.
And no matter, I guess it's a little like, what is it, Zeno's paradox, that if you keep going halfway, you never get there.
Reach it, yeah.
It's a little like that, where it's like, this is a nerdy feature, but it is not going to eat all of the nerdiness of the possible features. Like you were talking about how you use a clipboard manager that has a bunch of modes that do things like convert it to plain text or append some things together or do a transform on
snippets and like paste snippets.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the thing about when Apple builds these features, Apple is trying to find like, let's give a good feature that makes our platform better for users, even whether it's nerdy or broad. But it always leaves an opportunity for somebody who wants it the way they want it. And
it doesn't get too complex either, right? Like you start introducing all these features, you don't need to introduce the kitchen sink of like, oh, and it does all this stuff. It's like, well, what do most people care about? Most people care about, oh no, I accidentally copied over something else that was in my clipboard that I already wanted. Like that's solving a real problem that people do all the time.
The
and
realist
everybody
problem
does.
is literally, oh no, I just ruined my clipboard, but there was something good on it, and being able to get back to that. Can't believe we're talking about clipboard management, but here we are, and the shortcut stuff is amazing. I want to try it, but the potential there is so great to be able to. The example that Federico Vitici gives, but I think it's a good one, is, I've got these tags, and I've got this text, and I'm passing it to a shortcut. And what you want to do is take an LLM and say, hey, based on these tags and this text, what are the tags that we should use here? Yeah. And you get back a result, and that's like to do that using like string matches and things like that's a perfect use of an LLM. And in shortcuts, you will be able to do that, and it will kick back a list of tags.
Right.
And then you say apply those tags. And so you take this, there's this interim fuzzy step that is hard for traditional step-by-step code to do, but that LLMs are good for.
Yeah.
And like adding that kind of power, we were talking to Chris Lawley, and he said, imagine the idea of saying, I've got a note for an event, the current event that I'm doing, and like you could do a string match for that. But if your strings don't quite match, you can't say, oh, this event is this note. These are the same. But if you use an LLM step in your automation, it could intuit that this actually does match.
Right.
And that's like, then you're eliminating that whole like syntax error. Sorry, I don't understand.
And even better than that, like if you kind of zoom out again to like sort of the macro user level, these are all tasks that you can do as a person, but they're tedious. Right? That's the part is like, I could go through and read this text and look at my list of tags and figure out which tags fit what. Or I could look at my notes and look at my events and figure this out. But it just does it for me at that point.
And this is the tedium that even somebody who's doing like a shortcut or a script or something can't solve because it requires a fundamental kind of like mental processing task that you need a person to do. Yep. Like the act of assigning tags to a block of text, you need a human for, and the LLM could take that.
And there's
spot.
so many things that LLMs are bad at.
Yeah,
that it's great to find the cases
these are the ones that they're good
at these things. Yeah,
these are the ones where they're good at it.
There is value to it.
Yeah, you just shouldn't apply. I mean, really, take any tool and say, is this good at everything? And the answer is no, but it's probably good at something.
It's a real bad screwdriver. Let me tell you.
It's really, take it from me. It's a very bad food prep unless you're making chicken piccata or something. Anyway, back to the iPad. I don't know where the iPad is going, and I don't know if Apple knows it, but what I get the sense is there is no longer a fear that they're gonna. I think there was one point where they were afraid that they had to become the Mac, and then there was a point where they were afraid that they were going to become the Mac,
kind of cannibalize the
and
Mac.
now I feel a little more freedom. Like we're gonna let the iPad be Mac-like when it needs to be, and it's okay. So like. You could argue that something like Stage Manager was iPad sort of being like, no, Dad, I'm not going to be like you.
What's the iPadiest way I can do this?
And to be clear, for people who didn't see it or didn't catch it, split view, slide over, Stage Manager's still there, but like the way that they did Stage Manager with multi-windows before, that got thrown away. And this is a new windowing system, which is why it's more compatible with more devices, which is awesome. And although you can turn on Stage Manager, it's like the Mac now. It's just an optional thing you can do. But instead, they were like, put your windows where you want. It's got the little 3-dot stoplight thing in the corner. Like it's very much more Mac-like than it was. The Files app is more Mac-like.
Expose, as I mentioned.
Preview is there.
Preview.
So it's like they're not afraid of taking what works from the Mac.
Yeah.
And I think previously it was like, oh, but we're the iPad. It's like it's
had an
really
idealism
interesting
to it, right? Where the idea that it's like, what if we do go back and question all of the assumptions that we made with the Mac,
which is fine,
which is great. But
it turns out the Mac is good.
The Mac made some good choices too, and you can't deliberately avoid those things just because they were done before, right? Like sometimes the solution that we've used in the past is the correct solution.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not, and it is built on assumptions that were from 1984, and that was how we could do things in that, and it made sense. The other great little interface conceit that I really love it's on both iOS and iPadOS is they finally, in addition to like things like the menu bar on iPadOS that now appear when you need it, that contextual menu where you select text.
I saw you punch the air when they showed that.
I mean, that has driven me crazy.
So it's a little tiny strip, and you basically kind of need to swipe in it, right.
And it used to be if you had like 10 options, you would be there for a minute.
Next,
be like,
next,
it's not
next,
this one.
next,
And if you hit outside of it and accidentally deselected, you got
back
to start
to the
all over
beginning.
again. And it's like, this is silly.
Yeah.
So, the fact that they've now made that into a legit like pop-up.
It pops up.
Is
big.
It's a big usability win because Also, I think a lot of people didn't find things because they didn't swipe and keep swiping. And I would forget about things that were in there.
Right. Oh,
You would
yeah.
say, oh, hey, there's a translate file. Well, let's search the web with this. Like, I mean, I think that's a great example of like, let's question some of the assumptions we made within the context of iOS and iPad that go back 10 years or more.
I think iPad still gets crushed a little bit by the legacy of decisions that were made, good decisions that were made for the iPhone.
Right.
And that on a big screen, you would never have made that decision, but it inherited it from the iPhone. And those little teeny tiny popovers are a great example of that. It's like it actually doesn't make sense on the iPad, but that's where they are. And so you have to make a change. So yeah, it's I can't wait to try it. Mike Hurley says that he tried it during upgrade and thought it was amazing. It is, for those who don't know, it is a switch you have to turn on in settings. And I really appreciated that. And as far as I can tell, I asked. They didn't know, but they thought not. There's no like context switch where if you put it in the Magic Keyboard, it turns on or anything like that. So it's off, and it's off in settings, they said. And I think that's really interesting because I think one of the problems that people had with the old windowing system and with Stage Manager was you could turn it on accidentally, right? It was in Control Center, and now it's not even in Control Center, and Split View and Slide Over are not there anymore.
Right, they kind of repurpose. I thought this was very clever. They repurposed. It does tiling. And the tiling, when you snap the windows there and they point out you can adjust it, it basically works a little bit like Split View
It does, but again, none of those features work unless you turn on multi-window. And then when you turn it on, then you can still be in full screen mode most of the time, and then you grab from the lower right corner and pull it up, and suddenly you're in.
They made this point
multi-window.
a lot of times during the keynote, which is, look, you open an app and it's full screen just like an iPad, and if you want to use it just like that, and you open another app and that's full screen, you can keep doing that, right? Like even if the windowing system is on, you can still use your apps full screen one at a time, just like the classic iPad experience, which is good. I mean, it's kind of like
Stage Manager is kind of like that too.
Basic mode, right? Like it's like, okay, if you're not a person who needs 3 windows open, don't worry about it.
I mean, I'm a iPad Power user, and mostly I want full screen apps too. It's just sometimes I don't, but most of the time I do.
Yeah.
All right, we should talk about the design.
Yeah. Design's tricky, and I think you made this point several times leading up to this, and I think it's the right sort of approach, as you said, is like you go too far sometimes, right? Like you have to push radically when you're doing a design, and then maybe tweak and dial back a little bit, but otherwise, if you're doing a design that doesn't go far enough, it just feels like ineffectual. And I don't know where you feel like this one landed. The in-person demo I saw of it, I thought looked pretty good. But I also have looked at, I've only seen it a little bit and on various devices in various contexts, and it's kind of hard to make an overall judgment.
Yeah. Look, I'm sure there are things that people are going to see and say, oh, no, this is too much, and that they're going to have to dial back. Yeah. I have no doubt about it. Somebody's going to say, this seemed like a good idea, but everybody seems to hate it, so maybe we take that back. I think more likely is that there are more polished portions on some platforms and less polished portions on others. And we know you and I both saw the same screenshot of macOS under the beta, and I believe the caption was, "Look what they did to my boy." Where there's a toolbar with like buttons on it that are floating, and like it's bad, it's real bad.
Yeah.
And it's not, clearly that is not a place that has gotten the attention yet. And there are other parts of it that I think the glass widgets look nice on Mac OS.
I agree.
And I'm even open to the idea that the menu bar is sort of vanishing as long as they can keep legibility clear.
Yeah.
But that toolbar was a disaster. And it's just like, you know what? It's beta 1, and they probably know it's a disaster, but they had to ship a beta.
And it's a difficulty, too, of dealing with a look and feel that's being applied across many different devices, which is not really something they've done before.
And I think that's where the polish comes in, which is, I think it might be that they just didn't get enough time to maybe even not design it, but implement that design plan for Mac toolbars. And so they shipped it, and they're like, we'll fix it later. Because what you want to do is say on the Mac, because, I mean, this is the thing. So much of this is based on all the GPU power that they have with Apple Silicon and all the sensors that they've got on, and these handheld devices like iPads and iPhones being able to react dynamically to movement and tilting and create depth effects and move the glass, like the lighting effects. Great. Mac
don't-
doesn't move.
Yep.
And like it's just a different context. And you want it to feel, there's a concept that I've heard people here say, which is you want to be able to pick up an Apple device, go from one Apple device to a different Apple device, and have it feel familiar.
Yeah.
But you also want each device to be able to behave the right way for its
Right.
its thing.
Exactly.
And that's what this design has to do. And there are a few cases, like I think with the Mac, where it's not, it doesn't seem like maybe it's there because the Mac doesn't move in this. I mean, you can move your laptop on your lap and all that, but it's just
you're not moving around your Mac Studio or your Mac Mini
and
or
Apple
whatever.
TV, like TV OS, like they can put some little glass edges, but that was the least convincing in the keynote where they're like, oh, and look at the glass on the edges. I'm like, that's it. It's like it's not the best ambassador for the design language.
No, I mean,
because it's a TV. What
and I
do you
think
want?
overall, despite the refresh of the design language and them talking about and referencing iOS 7, this is nowhere near as radical a departure as iOS 7 was from iOS 6. That was a wholesale, total rethink to this.
Yeah.
Whereas this feels more like, fundamentally the buttons might look different, but they're in the same places and kind of in the same style, and like it's not it's good from the sense that like they've also realized, look, we can't just wholesale change entirely the way someone's iPhone looks and works overnight because people will be real mad about that. So they tried to walk this sort of line of like let's give everything kind of a facelift, a little pick me up. But it's still going to look instantly, as they said during the keynote, instantly familiar. Anybody who picks up an iPhone is not going to be confused about where their apps went or how to use things.
I like the philosophical approach, which is these are devices made of glass with curves, and that they're taking their cue from that.
Yeah, the hardware.
The idea of, I mentioned this on Upgrade, but like I thought it was very clever that the intro to Alan Dye was all these shots of all of the light and glass at Apple Park, because that was the message, is like, take it from the people who live in the light and glass factory. We know about light and glass, but it's not, that's what, honestly, the same design sensibility that inspires the products inspired this location.
Right. And
it goes to kind of Apple's, the tools and the materials that Apple really likes to iterate on. I mean, they did a brushed aluminum. That was an era. Metal. But this is glass and light and reflection, and they've got the GPU power to do it. And I think, I also, it's things like building layered icons, which they did for Vision OS, and now they've got like a whole app to help people do it. And when you look at the tinted icons, you're like, oh, that's what the tinted icons were supposed to be
I
last year.
I asked about that in my briefing, and was they eventually said that the overall look, if you're a developer and you updated your apps last year to support the tinting and stuff, you basically are getting all this, like it will work seamlessly in the new set of tints and themes that are available. But you may still go an extra step to work with the liquid glass sort of angle of it.
Yeah.
So,
I think they know what the pain points are for developers too, and they're trying that. Speaking of which, because we haven't really talked a lot about Apple Intelligence stuff, I thought good news in Apple, and a very Apple thing of like year one, just like with the iPhones, like year one, Apple Intelligence, we don't know what we're doing, come back later. And year two is like, yes, okay, developers, yes, here. And I think that's good. And they're starting with on-device models.
Yep.
But like app developers having access to Apple's models, and they are new versions of the models. We can debate Apple's place in the AI arms race all we like.
Yeah.
Because they're clearly not the leaders in it. But I'm not sure the foundation models on your iPhone running locally have to be the leader.
Well,
but giving access to them integrated into the platform for free to all app developers is really good, because it means that those developers can start thinking about features that they can do, and they don't have to sign up for, charge for API access to somebody's cloud service and what is their privacy policy and all that. Instead, it's just, got it, it's on device, it's Apple.
Plays to their strengths too, right? Which is, you look at ChatGPT and those other models and what they can do, and you think, okay, that's really impressive, and it's not stuff that Siri can do or that that necessarily Apple's models do. But then you look at what Apple does have, which is a gigantic community of developers, which is not a thing you can say about OpenAI.
Yeah.
And they can bring a utility to it in a way, and a surface like surfaces they can hit it on that OpenAI can't, because OpenAI is limited to either somebody paying a lot to have it built into their model, or you going out to the web or using the OpenAI app.
Right.
And so being able to say, like, okay, it's great that OpenAI can do that, but I can't do that in my apps that I use every day. I have to be using OpenAI over here, and OpenAI can't talk to my information and doesn't know about that. And so bringing that together, it may not be as advanced as the models go, but the utility may be higher, because it's doing stuff that you care about.
I know Google's got their own on-device models as well, but like that's one of the things. A lot of the arms race is happening in places that are not on-device, and on-device is important. Yeah, and it's very important for Apple. I also imagine was it Ben Thompson? Somebody wrote about this a few months ago, speculating about this sort of thing, and one of the things that came up was WeatherKit, and the idea that like if you have a weather app, you can use WeatherKit, but you pay for API calls, and it's like it scales. You can have millions and millions of API calls, and basically you get charged on how you use it. And so there is a business model there for them to open up private cloud compute at some point. And you got to build that into your app business model, because running that on a server costs money. But Apple can have favorable rates for developers for that, and it comes with Apple's privacy guarantee, and you have to use Apple's models. But there are room for this to grow. I think that's exciting. I also think it's really cool that if you're using shortcuts, you have access to private cloud compute and ChatGPT, so you can do whatever the heck you want if you're in shortcuts.
Plus, the private cloud compute not only comes with the privacy stuff, but also presumably environmental offsets. The models running on device obviously are running on your device. So yes, maybe they chew through more power. Maybe you have to recharge them more often, but it's much less than some of the data center stuff.
Exactly.
And of course, because Apple has its pledges for environment and running data centers
the
off renewable energy and all of that stuff,
green.
then they're also, helping ensure that insofar as is possible. So that helps mitigate some of the concerns about AI, which are omnipresent.
Yes, it's true. I mean, there's still issues. But there's some very interesting details.
Yeah.
As we wrap up, do you have any last thing that hit you that you want to mention before we go?
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to mention the single best feature introduced in today's entire keynote.
Hit me. Yeah.
Which is local audio recording on the iPad.
Oh yeah, it's true. That's our podcasting feature.
It's a niche feature, but it's the one that we've talked about for years.
I like they said audio and video, because then it's not just us. It's also YouTubers or whatever.
It is one of the things that I know was often pushed there as a pro feature, a thing that professionals want to do with their iPad, and both from a technological standpoint and from a philosophical standpoint. That's as you said earlier, don't be afraid of what the iPad can do. The fact that they have added that in as a feature, and other stuff that's with their background tasks.
Well, that was going to be my counter. So it's a system feature too. So the app developers don't have to support it.
It's also an iPhone too.
It just happens, which is awesome. And my counter is the background stuff on iPad OS, because that was the most brutal realization about Final Cut coming out for the iPad, is that you couldn't leave it and let it export. So I exported a video, and then I'm sitting there waiting for it. Or when I do podcast editing in Ferrite, it's the same thing. It needs to churn and export that file. And then I'm like, okay, well, while it's doing that, I use my Mac brain, and I'm like, while it's doing that, I'll go check my email or whatever. It's nuh-uh. You use Slide Over or something. And then I'm scrolling in Slide Over while this thing is happening. This is ridiculous. And now it's a live activity. You have to sign up for this API. Apple has to approve it, but it's a background API. And the point there is they didn't want users being like, why is my iPad so slow and its battery is dying? It's well, if there's something heavy going on in the background, it literally has to throw up a live activity and says, I am exporting video right now, which is like a progress bar. It's great. It's fine. Perfect. It's fine. No notes.
It's the thing where it's I don't have to be here for this. I don't have to be here waiting while you export my video.
Can I just go check my email while it's exporting?
You must watch.
All right. We will be back with another podcast on Friday, I assume, probably, we always do. But that's the end of this from Apple Park for Everybody bonus podcast for you. Until next time, bye, Dan.
Bye, Jason.
0. Wow. We nailed it. Nice. Professional.